I hadn't always done a really good job of getting out and networking and going to professional association and organization meetings. I said, surely they're there and I've just missed them. What I found out is no, I had not really missed them because, relatively speaking, there are very few Black men in the field, right? Less than 6% of Black men in the entire field of public relations. It is primarily dominated by women, right? White women first, then Black women, then white men have the higher leadership roles, and then Black men fall in as fourth.
Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. Receipts are evidence or proof that something has occurred. Our guests are evidence that Black excellence is alive and well. They will be sharing their receipts on how they've been able to accomplish so much in their life. I'm your host, Tony Jackson. Let's get started. Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. I am super excited to introduce and speak and have a great conversation with our guest today. Our guest's name is Chuck Wallington. He is an Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer and Communications Officer for Cone Health. In his role, he reports to the CEO and is one of the 10 members of Cone Health's most senior leadership team. Establishes the business strategy for this healthcare enterprise based in Greensboro, North Carolina. Prior to joining Cone Health, Chuck was a leader with American Express, where he was a vice president of communications. In his role, Chuck had global responsibility for internal and external communications for the American Express customer service centers in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and India. Chuck earned his bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In 2017, he also earned a master's degree in communication management from Syracuse University. His master's thesis, which is called Barriers, Borders, and Boundaries, exploring why there are so few African-American males in public relations profession, was named one of the top 15 public relation research insights of 2020. In June of 2021, Chuck earned a PhD in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T State University. His dissertation is titled Navigating the C-Suite, Exploring the Leadership Journeys of African-American Male Executives in U.S. Corporations. Chuck's dissertation is now a book titled A Seat at the C-Suite Table, Insights from Leadership Journey of African-American Executives. His book was released in the marketplace in January of 2024. Chuck and his wife, Sandra, reside in Greensboro, North Carolina. They are active members at St. James Presbyterian Church. Chuck is a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and we have him here today. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you, Tony. I am excited to be here with you, my friend.
Let's hop right into it, Chuck. Your story is incredible. Tell me what got you into the public relations profession initially. What drove you to that profession?
It was God's divine guidance, if we're going to be honest for a second, and I'll tell you how that unfolded. So I knew as a young kid I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. By the time I was in the third grade, Tony, I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And I grew up in a household where back then there was a morning paper and an afternoon paper. You're too young to know anything about that. But back in the day, most cities had a morning paper and an afternoon paper, and we subscribed to both. And I watched my family read both papers, and so I picked up that skill and that habit of reading. So I had a nose for news at a really, really young age. So by the time I was in the third grade, I knew I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And so I set my sights. I was that kind of geeky kid who set my sights on things at a young age. So by the time I got ready to look at colleges, I wanted to go to a college that had a school of journalism, and that's what led me to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill because of its well-known school of journalism. So I got there, majored in journalism, and set my sights on being a reporter. And God allowed me to do that. So my very first role out of college was a summer internship in Detroit with the Detroit Free Press. When that internship ended, I then went to Dallas, Texas, and I was a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald. And I stayed there for about a year or so. And I was sitting in the newsroom one day and got a call from a recruiter who said, I'm looking for an entry-level public relations professional for a Fortune company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, about 30 miles from where I grew up in Greensboro. And so I said, okay, sure. Yes, you can submit me as somebody to be considered. Long story short, Tony, I was brought back to Winston-Salem for 2 rounds of interviews, and I was then offered a job. So that's how I got into the field of public relations and communications. It was not because I wanted to. It's because I set my sights early on being a reporter, and I mastered those skills and did very well. And that opened the door for me to then segue into the work that I do today. And I will tell you, I've never looked back. I've never regretted it. And I do believe it's a part of God's divine plan. He chose to use my interest in being a reporter as a foundation for the skills that I would need to be successful in the field of public relations and communications.
So let's dig into that a little bit. They say luck is laboring under correct knowledge, or success is when opportunity meets preparedness. Talk to me about the importance of the journalism degree, the journalism background to being where you are today.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that the skills that I learned while in journalism school and that I got to practice while I was a reporter are the same skills that I use today. If you think about it, if you're going to write a story, the writing of the story starts with asking questions, right? So you got to something happened, something occurred, or there's something you're curious about. You got to have questions that you want to ask someone so you can understand the facts about what happened. So I learned very early on to ask the right questions. At the same time, I learned to shut my mouth after I ask each question and then to listen for what people said and to be observant about what they did not say, because oftentimes in what they don't say, there's information. And so I learned again to be quiet and to assess the situation, to ask follow-up questions along the way, so that when I walked away from the interview, I was pretty clear on what the facts were around the story that I was going to write. And so, again, that's a skill that I use every day. If I'm going to be successful as a public relations professional, as a marketing professional, I have to, one, understand what is it that my team and I are communicating, or what is it that we are marketing? Why should anybody care about what we're communicating and marketing? And if they do care, what do they care about? What are the questions that they want answered? And so we get to do this work every day in the work that we do as marketing and communications professionals. So those skills transfer perfectly into what I get to do every day and what I've been able to do for the past 30 plus years as a communications and marketing professional.
And that actually leads us to what you do today. You are the Executive VP and Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Cone Health. What does that job entail, and what does a typical day look like for you?
Well, I'm going to answer the story in a couple ways. So one, I'm going to tell you another story within a story, and then I'll answer your question. So here's what's interesting about the seat that I occupy today. And again, I'm going to tell you, this is God's divine guidance. When my parents became pregnant with me, I couldn't be born in any of the Cone Health facilities because then they were segregated.
Wow.
And so I was born at the Black Hospital here in Greensboro, L. Richardson Memorial Hospital. That hospital has since closed, but the structure still remains here on Bimbo Road in Greensboro. So I couldn't be born in any of those facilities. I was born at the Black Hospital, but grew up in Greensboro, spent my first 18 years here, and always watched and observed the healthcare system in general, and this one in particular. And as time went on, the healthcare system became desegregated. This was the first in the U.S. to be desegregated due to a lawsuit, and that then allowed other healthcare systems across the U.S. to become desegregated as well. So I watched that metamorphosis, and certainly by the time I was 18 and went away to college, everything was desegregated, and we were able to get care wherever we wanted to get care. But there's some irony, if you will, in the fact that this kid who couldn't be born at any of our facilities was then offered a job 13 years ago to come here to Cone Health, first as a vice president of marketing and communications. A few years later, I was promoted to senior vice president, became the first African-American senior vice president here. And then in 2019, I was promoted to executive vice president and chief marketing and communications officer, became the first member of the executive team to be a person of color. So there's history in that. There's irony in that as well, Tony. And it's not lost on me that any of this occurred. It was and is a part of a divine plan. It's just been my job to, again, do my very, very best so that when the door of opportunity opened, I was able to step into it and be prepared to take on the role. So that's a little more context into
Yeah.
what I'm now going to share. So that's the context behind my coming to Cone Health. So what do I do every day? I have two roles. So as an executive vice president and a member of the executive leadership team, I do report to the CEO, and that team of 10 people, we're charged, Tony, with creating the best business strategy that we can for this enterprise. As our CEO reminds us all the time, our goal is to make sure that we leave this organization better than we found it. Our goal is to make sure that when we've left Cone Health and gone off and retired and are doing other things, this enterprise is still here. It's still vibrant. We're still able to care for people as they need care. We're still able to keep them healthy as they want to remain healthy. That's what we're charged with doing. So we have to make sure that we have the absolute best business strategies that will allow us to do that. And we're in the middle of a very competitive marketplace. So that's part of what I do. That's half of what I do. The other half of what I do is that I lead a team of marketing and communications professionals, and our charge is to create the best marketing strategy and the best business and the best communication strategy to support the overall business strategy. The two go together, right? You know this. You got to have an overarching business strategy and plan first. Then you create a marketing strategy that supports and a communication strategy that supports it. So that's the other part of what I get to do. So I was telling someone just this morning, I have the best job in the world. I get to come to work every day and work with some very talented people, both on strategy and the implementation of the strategy for this organization and for the community that we're privileged to serve.
That is amazing. I love your answer. I love how you gave the context, spoken like a true journalist. You had to set the stage. That was awesome. Okay. Your master's thesis, it was titled Barriers, Borders, and Boundaries, exploring why there are so few African-American males in public relations. Can you please share with me your thoughts on the changes that need to be made to bridge that gap and to create more diversity in that space?
I will do that. But before, I'll give you some context on that too. So I didn't just arbitrarily pick that topic. So when I got to Syracuse and was working on my master's, we had to do original research in order to graduate. And so I remember being on campus, and I had a conversation one of the first days of being on campus with a professor. And I said, there's something odd here. I said, there are 9 members of my master's cohort. Out of the 9, I was the only male and the only person of color. And I said, I don't understand. Where are all the people of color? In particular, where are the Black men? And this professor, Professor Terry Flynn, looked at me and said, Chuck, that's a great question. There's a gap. You should make that the focus of your master's research. And I did, because I'd always wondered, where are the people who look like me? I thought, Tony, maybe it's because I work for these fairly large companies and maybe I just don't know where folks are. I hadn't always done a really good job of getting out and networking and going to professional association and organization meetings. I said, surely they're there and I've just missed them. What I found out is, no, I had not really missed them, because relatively speaking, there are very few Black men in the field, right? Less than 6% of Black men in the entire field of public relations. It is primarily dominated by women, right? White women first, then Black women, then white men have the higher leadership roles, and then Black men fall in as fourth. So, and that was really the impetus behind doing the research anyway. So part of what came out of that research is that lots of young people, particularly people of color and Black men, don't know what the field of public relations is about. They don't grow up with anybody in their household who does this for a living. They don't go to church with anybody who does this body of work for a living. Their parents don't know folks who do this work for a living. So there's just a flat out knowledge gap, just aren't sure about what the profession is. Then for those who think they do know what the profession is about, they make their perceptions based on what they see on TV. So think about Olivia Pope when Scandal was on TV, right? Yeah. Think about the sports agent who's negotiating contracts and speaking on behalf of the athlete, right? So you can understand and appreciate that. So there are those folks who are tangentially a part of the field, but to do the true strategy that we do every day in this profession, that's not something that people have visibility and insight to. So People of color grow up not really understanding what the profession is all about. So that's one barrier. The other is once folks get into the field, a couple of things can happen. You're either going to figure it out on your own, or you're going to figure it out with the help of some other folks, or you're going to throw up your hands after a while and say, I don't get this, right? I'm feeling left out. I don't see anybody who looks like me. I'm not getting the best assignments. I'm not getting any coaching. I'll just leave and do something else. And sadly, oftentimes that is what happens to folks when they get into the field if they don't have a good experience fairly early on. What the research also shows is that there's a lack of mentors, right? Because if there aren't many of us who are in the field, then there's no one or few people who look like us who can be mentors. I will say parenthetically, mentors don't always have to look like us, but you need someone who will take you under your wing and his or her wings and say, look, let me show you the ropes based on my own experiences. And as people of color, we tend to not always have that. So those are some of the challenges as well in the field that kind of can be barriers for people coming in and trying to get in.
I remember reading a portion of your book in the beginning. You were talking about how, and I can't remember their name, but a person who was your sponsor, they're the one who's helped you to go from your original, your last position to now your current position.
That's right.
Can you talk to me about the value of sponsors and also the value of mentors? And if you distinguish those two, do you use that word interchangeably? Is there a difference between the two?
Thank you, Tony, for that question. There is definitely a difference, and I'll spend a minute talking about the differences because the differences matter. The research would suggest, Tony, that a mentor is someone who is invested in you and your life and your career for the long haul, for some indefinite period of time. There's not always there's a beginning, of course. There's not always a clear middle and a clear end, but that mentor is in it with you for the long haul. The mentor may or may not look like you. That's okay. But the mentor has wisdom that can be shared with you. The mentor can help you problem solve about things that are going on in your work life or things that are going on in your professional life, or the two often come together. So a good mentor can be there to guide you through those experiences and those journeys in life. And again, that mentor doesn't necessarily have to be an expert in your field. The mentor is more of an expert in life, right? In terms of his or her experiences and how his or her experiences can mold, shape, influence, and inform decisions that you are making. So that's a mentor. Let's talk about a coach. A coach is someone who, again, is in your life for some period of time. Clearly, there's a beginning, typically a middle, and oftentimes an end as well. The coach's role is more particular to the role that you're in oftentimes. So you could have someone to coach you on, you're just coming into being an executive role, right? So a coach can coach you the skills that you need to know and what you need to do and say and how you need to conduct yourself as a coach can also help you with how you interact with other people, right? What you need to think about as you're going into a certain setting. So the coach can be more for specific situations, right? As opposed to the mentor who's in it for a number of different things. Let's talk now about allies and sponsors. Allies and sponsors, Tony, are the folks who are speaking up for you on your behalf when you're not in the room. They're the people who say, Joe needs to be on the field, and here's why he needs to be on the field. Or Joe or Hakeem really needs the opportunity to take on this expanded assignment. I've seen him perform. He's really good at this. Let's give him a chance. So that's the distinction between those different people. All are important. And as the research in my book showed, you can be successful. You can find your way all the way to the C-suite and have very few, and in some cases, no mentors at all. But you cannot be successful and you won't make it that far if you don't have the coaches, the allies, and the sponsors, because you got to have somebody. Someone has to speak up for you, even if you don't have a mentor who's been there in the background working his or her magic on your behalf. But you've got to have those allies and those sponsors. So that's the distinction between the four. And again, if you link it back to the research in the book, about half of them had mentors and spoke very, very, very fondly of their mentor experiences. The other half didn't have mentors, but all of them, Tony said, I wish I had one. Right? Those who had one were happy they had one. Those who did not said, gee, I really wish I'd had a mentor.
Well, I've never heard that broken down that way before when you make the distinction in the hierarchy of importance in regards to having someone who's speaking up for you. And almost like a mentor is a nice thing to have, but not necessarily vital.
It makes your journey a little bit more interesting and a little easier if there's a mentor, but it's not necessary. Again, in my own story, and I do mention this in the acknowledgments of the book, I'm one of those who never really had a mentor. I had one really good mentor very early on in my career. Sadly, he died of a massive heart attack when I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s. So I missed out. I miss him to this day, and I've just missed out on having someone to step in. So I consider myself a bit self-taught in that area. But clearly, I wouldn't have gotten to this place, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if I didn't have good coaches as well as sponsors and allies. And I credit Terry Aiken and Dr. Mary Jo Cagle as being two of those folks who clearly were sponsors and allies for me to get me to this place here at Cone Health.
You know, reading your book, it has not missed on me the role that God and your faith plays in who you are and how you become who you are today.
Yes.
Talk to me about what role your faith life plays. I know sometimes there's a big conversation that you got to keep work stuff professional and keep your personal, keep your religion and your politics and all of that behind closed doors. Talk to me about how you live your life being authentically you in all of these different settings and the role that your faith plays in your life.
Yeah. So again, like many of the folks in the book, in fact, one of the sections is titled Faith, Family, Friends, and Fraternity. So again, to a group pretty much agree that part of their own success was having that mixture of those folks to be able to help them along the way. You need that to be able to celebrate the good times and to weather the bad times. So for me, my faith has been present from the very, very beginning. And yes, you're right. When I was younger and just starting out, I never shied away from being a person of faith, but I probably didn't openly talk about it unless I was talking with other believers, right? In the workplace, you can tell, right? You can tell those who aren't. I just stayed away from those conversations with those who were not or just didn't talk about it and could gravitate towards those who did. So that's how I lived the early part of my career. Never really tried to separate them, but I was just really clear on when it was appropriate and okay to bring them together. As I've gotten older and as I become more comfortable in who I am, and I've put some of that aside and said, while I'm not the guy that wears the big cross and carries the Bible with me all the time, I am who I am. And I acknowledge where my blessings come from. And I have learned over time that it's okay in my own unique way to do that. So, yeah, I have grown in my comfort level in doing that. I've grown in knowing how to do it. And I've watched other people of faith react when I do what I do. I've watched others who probably are thinking he should keep that to himself react. And I don't care. I'm at this age and stage where I just do not care. As an example, I'm the guy who in any setting is going to pause, bow my head, and say a brief prayer. So when I'm in work settings and it's time to eat, we can be all sitting around the same table or at separate tables. There can be conversation going on. Let it happen. I'm going to stop, bow my head, say my little prayer, and then I'll start eating. So those are things that, again, that I have said, I'm not going to walk away from that. That's part of who I am. It's part of how I'm blessed to sit here and have this conversation. And if others are uncomfortable, that's on them. That's not something that I choose to own.
Absolutely. Just listening to you talk, Chuck, you're obviously very well polished. You have a background that you have a rock solid foundation in your faith. I feel like if we would have rewind the clock back 30 years and I was having this conversation with you, I would have just met a younger version of a super well polished individual. Talk to me about association and talk to me about who you were spending your time with as you were developing and coming of age all the way to adulthood and to where you are today. Because it seems like, and I know outside perceptions sometimes is off, but it seems like you have it all together. You know, you got the strong marriage. You got it, and oftentimes they say that we become like the people that we associate with. So talk to me about your thought process on association And who were some people who influenced you to be the man that you are today?
I'm going to start with the present and work my way backwards because you referenced a strong marriage, and I am thankful for a strong marriage. Sandra was sent to me by the good Lord, and we're a great balance for each other. Here's an example. She insists that I collect all the trash from the trash can and wheel those trash cans down to the curb every Monday night so that the trash people can pick them up on Tuesday. She doesn't care what I get to do during the day. She doesn't care about what people call me. Dr.
Mr. C-suite executive, go take that trash out.
She could care less about that. She could care less about that. That she appreciates that, but she's like, and the trash still needs to go out. You need to roll the trash to the curb. So in terms of people who've influenced me, I will start with her. For the last 25 years, she's been a great influence on me, and I'm very, very thankful for her. Our parents were also great influencers, on me. Our dad had an 8th grade education, Tony. Wow. Our mother had 2 years of college, and together the two of them understood and appreciated the value of an education. And they ensured that I had an education, and then my sister, who's 2 years younger than I am, also had an education. And by the way, she's an established corporate executive in her own right. So they were points of influence. Our grandparents, the same way. Again, they had no formal education, but they understood and appreciated the value of education and always spoke to us about you're going to college and this is what we want you to think about doing. So certainly parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, that whole village, right? They were sources of influence. Within that village was the church, right? So we're the kids who grew up in the church, grew up in the Baptist church. I learned public speaking, doing Easter speeches and Christmas speeches. Again, you're too young to remember that and know anything about that.
Oh, I remember that.
You have to do that. Back in the day, that was an expectation. There was the Sunday school or the church Easter program or the Christmas program. You got your speech, you memorized your speech, and you stood up on the stage and you did your recitation. So that's where I learned public speaking. I learned leadership in the church, right? Working in the Sunday school and with the youth and all that kind of stuff. That's where leadership started for me in the church. I have to also mention my fraternity. So I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, and I became a member when I was 18, 19 years old. So I was relatively young. And leadership again there on the undergraduate level in our undergraduate chapter, and that leadership has continued through every alumni chapter that I've been blessed to be a member of. There are a number of ways that I have been able to take on my leadership skills, but rest assured, I'm not perfect. I am not perfect by any means, but I do my best to lean into what I've learned, to tap into my ever-changing and evolving village. I just try to be the best person that I've been created to be.
All right. That's sweet, sweet black and gold. I see the color scheme on the book. I see
yes, sir.
It's all tying together now.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but yeah, sorry. I see it's all tying together. I went to University of Iowa, so I'm always a little jealous of people who went to schools with the heavy Greek life and have that. I claim all of y'all, even though I'm not.
That's good. That's great.
On 61, you have a question that says, "What problem or challenge, if any, does the gap in the number of African-American male executives have on U.S. corporations?" And I want to read the answer that Joshua said. He's a healthcare executive.
Okay.
He said, the United States of America is becoming more diverse, becoming more brown and black, and so are the consumers of technology, healthcare, in any industry. Sometimes the assumption is people of color don't have money. There's a lot of people of color that I know that have money, and their purchasing power is getting bigger and bigger. And so those Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies have to understand the urgent nature of getting people of color to help advance the opportunity within the organization. Talk to me about the potential missed opportunities that many companies are experiencing because of this lack of diversity. And are you seeing a closing of this gap for more companies? Because I know during 2020 and George Floyd, a lot of companies, a lot of executives pledged to increase their numbers in diversity. And now when we're having this conversation and recognizing that this is not just a good social decision, but it's also a good business decision. Talk to me about your thoughts on that.
So that's the impetus for why this research matters in the first place. It is because it's just flat out good business sense. I'm going to go back pre-George Floyd, then I'll comment on George Floyd, I'll comment on present state. So prior to George Floyd, I think there was an understanding among many businesses that you're going to be better off strategically if you've got diverse voices around the table. For example, how can you create an advertising strategy about a diverse marketplace if you don't have diverse people sitting around the table to create that advertising strategy? How can you create a business strategy for a diverse marketplace? Pick your industry, it doesn't matter, if you don't have diverse people helping you to understand and solve for that business strategy from a broader consumer perspective. That's just the plain science behind why it makes sense to have diversity at the decision-making level in addition to at the execution level in any business. It's great to have people of color and diversity doing customer service work. Nothing wrong with that at all. But do you have that diversity at the higher levels when you're creating the products and services that you want to introduce in the marketplace, or when you're creating the strategies to sustain the businesses that these products and services come from? So I think as U.S. companies have evolved, they've understood over time that it makes sense. It is really good business sense to have diversity of thinking around the decision-making table. And there are plenty of examples, right? If we thought about it, of organizations that haven't had diversity of thinking around the table, they've made decisions, they've launched products in the marketplace, and they failed miserably. And in failing miserably, you've had consumer backlash. People who said, I can't believe that you thought I wanted something like this. You didn't think about this and you didn't think about that. Might that have been avoided if you'd had diversity around the tables? So I think that's been in place for a while, maybe not at the degree that we'd like it to be, but I think it's been in place for a while, generally speaking, in U.S. businesses. But again, the gap still exists, right? The higher up you go in organizations, the less those organizations tend to look like you and me, the more they tend to look like our white counterparts. So that remains the gap. So that's that kind of pre-George Floyd. And you're right, when George Floyd occurred and we were then in the middle of the pandemic of COVID-19 as well as the social injustice pandemic, lots of businesses said, oh, crap. If we're doing something, let's accelerate what we're doing and let's add more to it. Other businesses that were doing virtually nothing said, oh, we got to do something. And so they did something. The question now becomes, are those efforts still in place? And if they're still in place, are they still in place at the same levels that they were immediately after George Floyd or not? And there is data that would suggest that it's more of the or not, right? So companies that were doing the right thing in diversity of thinking and leading and being are likely still doing those things because it's part of their values and who they are. There's data that would suggest that those who were doing it because it was the right thing to do are no longer funding those efforts. And so you see those strategies dropping off as being less important. But things come full circle. So if I were offering any advice, my advice would be, sadly, there'll be another George Floyd incident or something like it. And we shouldn't wait for that incident to be the reason that businesses do what makes sense for the communities that they serve. So I think that's my assessment of what happened prior to, what happened during, where we are now. I think there's been a waning, and I would offer that waning is an opportunity. I'm going to throw in a quick example from here at Cone Health just to illustrate the importance of having diverse voices around the table. So it's the pandemic, and it's that period of time when there was no vaccine, but there was hope that there was one being developed, and then one was developed. And we were, like other healthcare systems, about to make those vaccines available in the marketplace. So we're sitting around the decision-making table here, and there was a lot of excitement about, oh, wow, in a couple of weeks, we're going to get these vaccines. Let's begin the process of thinking about how to get them in the marketplace. So I said, so do we understand that not everybody's going to be excited about getting a vaccine? And there were quizzical looks among some people. And I said, no. I said, there's distrust among a segment of our marketplace, people of color, particularly African Americans, because people remember what happened with the Tuskegee experiment. And other times when people of color have been used in the space of healthcare, oftentimes unknowingly, the results haven't been great. And so there is distrust among many people. So we had to back away, pivot, and say, look, we have to do some educating before we can vaccinate everybody in that category. And so we did. And we ended up being very successful, but we had to stop, pivot, and then rethink our strategy. I wonder what would happen, though, if I had not been in the room to offer that insight, right? So that's an example of the value in having diverse voices in the room as you are pondering strategies and tactics and making decisions about those strategies and tactics.
One question I have is, one thing that I'm definitely seeing over the last 5-10 years is I'm seeing more diversity in advertising. As far as the couple that's depicted, biracial couples and people who look like me, and it's something that was not as common 5, 10, 15 years ago. Is that a representation of the growth in diversity in those leadership positions, the people that are making those decisions? Or is that just a representation of someone saying, okay, I think this is the trend, and so now I'm just going to pick up on what I see other people doing? I guess what I'm saying is, are the images that I'm seeing in the advertising space evidence that gap that we're talking about is closing, or is it just evidence that people are catching on to the trends that are just duplicating what other people are doing?
I'm going to answer it from the perspective of what we do here, because that's where I know what the answer is, and I will then extrapolate from there what I think is happening in other areas. So we do it here for two reasons. One, we want to make sure that our advertising reflects the marketplace in which we're blessed to serve. And so that marketplace is over 40% people of color. So we're really clear in all of our messaging that our messaging has to be words that people can relate to, and the people conveying the messages have to look like the marketplace. So that's very intentional for us based on data, right? And then again, as a person of color in the decision-making seat, I get to ensure that as a team that we remain focused on that. Fortunately, if I stepped away today, the team that's in place that I get the privilege of leading knows that and would carry that on, because that's how we have evolved over time as a team to think about what the data suggests to us about the diversity of our marketplace. So that's what we do here. I would offer, Tony, that other organizations are doing the same thing, right? They too have data about their consumers, and they're realizing that their consumers are no longer homogeneous. They're clear on what their consumers look like, and they're smart, and they're saying, and if we want to reach all of our consumers or the vast majority of our consumers, we have to ensure that our messaging and our advertising looks like, reflects, and speaks to that broader marketplace. So I think that's what's happening in other industries as well.
I need you to help me with something, Chuck. I'm glad I got you here. I want to get your input, your feedback. Obviously, you have way more business experience than me, clearly sharper than I am. And so the question that I have is, and this has been a topic that I've had with several people. I've seen this conversation go on online, and I don't know exactly if there's a right or wrong answer, but I'll tell you the issue, and then I'll tell you my viewpoint on it. A lot of people are having conversations right now about the topic of code switching. Is it good? Is it not good? What's the purpose of it? All of these different things. And so I remember growing up, and my mom would have one voice when she talked to us on the phone, right? And then I would call her at work, or someone from some professional setting will call the house, and I'm like, she sounds a little bit different. And growing up, then I went to University of Iowa, completely different setting. I've lived in different settings, and now where my wife lives, in some of the places that we frequent, we're often one of the only. So my question is, well, my viewpoint is, I believe that the ability to code switch is exactly that. It's an ability. It's almost like being able to speak a different language. My wife's side of the family is from Nigeria, and when I go to Nigeria, when they come here, many of them wish they could have that ability. No matter what the degrees they have and the success they have, they know that the accent that they have, the way that they speak, may still cause some kind of drag, some kind of resistance in their road to success. What are your thoughts on this whole concept of code switching? What's your perspective on it? Is it thumbs up, thumbs down? Are you neutral behind it? What are your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, thumbs up. Code switching is what it is. It's real. It is a part of who we learn to be and how we learn to survive and thrive in this country, right? In a system that wasn't created for our success. So if you look at the creation of businesses in the U.S., they were created by white men for their success. And so for anybody else who's not a white male to come along and be successful, you have to figure out what are the things that you can do to then be successful. So what you heard with your mom was an ability to ensure that she sounded like the voices that she heard, right? In the places where she worked. And we've all figured that out. We've all figured out how we need to sound and how we need to use the King's English and how we can flex in different settings. The way we choose to speak in the workplace is likely very different or somewhat different than the way we choose to speak when we're at home. And that's very different from when you were playing ball and you and your teammates were having conversations. You weren't talking to them, I would bet, the way you and I are sitting here and having a conversation as well.
Not at all.
Code switching. That's all code switching, and it's okay.
Right.
So again, the research would suggest that it's a learned skill. And we learn it to survive. We learn it to thrive. And it happens so automatically that we don't even think about it. But we do it intuitively, and it works for us. It's when folks do not learn how to code switch, though, that there is a problem, right? So we can't come into the workplace talking like you would talk when you're on the football field, and I can't do that. And like I might if I'm hanging with some of my friends or some of the guys that I grew up with or something like that. We have to have the ability to flex and to know when to flex at a moment's notice. So nothing wrong with code switching. It's a skill, and it's an okay skill. It's a great skill to have, in fact.
We're wrapping up here. I've got a couple of more questions. One key question I will have for you is, what is the best piece of career advice that you've experienced so far? The best advice anyone's ever given you in regards to your career?
That I don't have to have all the answers, but I have to have the right questions. I thought for so many years, particularly early on, that I had to understand what the anticipated questions might be, and I had to have the answers. I never thought it was okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back with you. Or I never thought it was okay to say, that's interesting. Let's have a conversation about that a little bit later. I always thought, particularly as a person of color, I need to have answers. So there was a lot of pressure on me for years and years and years and years and years in my life and career to have the answers. And at some point, I realized that's not my job. On some level it is, but as I take on more responsibilities and as I lead people, part of what I am doing as a leader is asking the right questions of the people around me, the subject matter experts who are far smarter than I am about any given thing. If I ask the right questions of them, they're going to give us the answers. And those answers will then inform whatever solutions that we're looking for, whatever strategies we're creating. So that would be the one piece of advice that I would give to anybody who's listening. And I certainly wish someone had given it to me, that I just don't have to have all the answers, but I do have to have the right questions, because the right questions lead to the right answers.
Another follow-up question I have, Chuck, is if you had to give advice to your 18-year-old self, and in a way, I'm asking you to advise maybe some 18-year-old who may be watching this. If you had to give advice to the 18-year-old self, knowing who you wanted to be, knowing what you wanted to accomplish and the success that you wanted to have, knowing that you had a strong family behind you and probably some very strong expectations of who you should become, what advice would you give to that 18-year-old who was headed off to Chapel Hill?
To go for it. To do like I did, to go for it and to say, okay, I want to be a reporter, and I'm going to learn everything that I can that this school has to offer for me to be a reporter. I'm going to get into the School of Journalism. While I'm waiting for admission to that school, I am going to write for the campus newspaper. I'm going to do all those things that give me experience in a field that I think I want to go into, because I can get that experience and it costs me nothing other than what my tuition is. So I'm going to go for it for all it's worth. I'm going to explore, because if I think this is what I want to do, this is a great way to find out. Also, while I'm exploring, I got to be open to other things. So while I thought I wanted to be a reporter, what if that's not what the good Lord had in store for me? I need to be open to other things. So while I was having fun learning about being a reporter and being a journalist, I was also open to, well, what if it's not that? What if it's English? What if I'm supposed to go somewhere and teach English or something like that? I had to be open to those things. So that's what I would offer to my 18-year-old self and to anybody who's listening. Yes, at age 18, but frankly, at any age, right? Go for it. Whatever your goals are, go for it. Remember, in my own story, I returned to graduate school when I was in my early 50s to earn my master's degree, and I earned my PhD when I was 59. I'm 62 years old now. So that same advice applies thank you, sir. That same advice applies as long as we have breath in our bodies. I think the Lord wants us to go for those goals that we believe that he has set out for us and see what happens. We just might be pleasantly surprised.
And on that note, we are going to wrap it up. Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Thank you for all the wisdom that you share with us. So the book can be purchased on Amazon,
on Amazon, and any online retailer.
Any online retailer. Seat at the C-suite table.
Yes.
Definitely go and pick up a copy. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, Chuck.
Thank you, Tony. My pleasure.